Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee where people were proud of hard work, and that's what I learned early on. My dad ran a mechanic shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. My mom taught middle school, always pushing me to aim higher than the small town limits. They weren't the type to talk about dreams, they just did. But one day, I saw something that shifted everything. It was the City Project, the first of its kind in town, a new development that was supposed to change the entire landscape. I was just a teenager, but the way they were designing that space, pulling together every piece of the puzzle, it hooked me. I remember standing there, watching the workers put up scaffolding, the blueprints on the table, the whole thing coming together. It hit me. I wanted to build things, shape the future, not just repair what was broken. That moment marked the start of my journey, but it wasn't easy. I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms into architecture. I'd walk into meetings, and it felt like I was invisible, like my voice didn't count. The guys around the table would nod to each other, share a few laughs, but when I spoke, the room would go quiet for just a second too long, like they were waiting for me to mess up. But I pushed through. I had to. I wasn't going to let some outdated notion of what women could do in architecture stop me. I didn't have time for that. My work had to speak louder than their doubts. I figured if I just kept my head down and delivered, I could prove them wrong. I didn't expect them to respect me. I just needed them to see my results. And now here I was, a senior architect at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. It had taken years, but my work was finally starting to get the recognition it deserved. The long hours, the sacrifices, the constant proving myself, it had all led to this point. And it was about damn time. A few weeks after I'd settled into my role, I got the email. The subject line was simple: mentorship assignment. When I clicked open the message, it was just as straightforward. John Myers would be mentoring me. John was a legend around here. He'd been with the firm for decades, and if you wanted to make it big in architecture, you had to get in his good graces. His projects were all over the city. Massive, complex, iconic. Everyone respected him. But not everyone liked him. I'd heard enough stories to know that. Still, I didn't have much of a choice. The firm's culture didn't leave much room for questions, and besides, I wasn't here to make friends. The first meeting was a quiet one. John sat across from me, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me like he was sizing me up. His gray hair and tired eyes gave him the air of someone who'd seen it all and didn't expect much from anyone anymore. "So," he said, tapping a pen against his notebook, "I assume you're here to make a name for yourself." He paused, like waiting for me to confirm. "That's good. Most women don't make it to senior positions in this field, but, well, we'll see." It was said so casually, like an offhand comment, not meant to be cruel, but it landed hard. It didn't sound like encouragement, not to me. It sounded like a prediction. An observation, sure, but one that made it clear he didn't think women belonged at the top. And I felt that sting right in the pit of my stomach, deeper than I wanted to admit, but I didn't let it show. I just nodded, kept my face neutral. No need to give him the satisfaction of knowing it bothered me. "Yeah, we'll see," I said, my voice steady, even though I felt anything but. John gave a slight smile, like he approved of my response. We went through the motions after that. He outlined a few projects he thought would be good for me, none of which sounded particularly challenging. But that was the point, right? He was testing me. The projects were his way of determining if I had the patience to deal with the bullshit before I could handle something more significant. As weeks passed, I saw how things worked around the office. The men deferred to John, no question. If John spoke, it was law. If I spoke, it was ignored. Or if I was lucky, it got a brief, distracted acknowledgement. The shift in power was subtle at first. Small things, like him taking credit for ideas I'd suggested a week earlier. He never outright belittled me in front of anyone. But it was clear, his position wasn't one to be questioned, and I wasn't going to change that. I could have gone to Sarah Williams or someone else to complain, but I wasn't here for drama. I wasn't here to make waves. I was here to prove I belonged. I didn't need his approval, and I sure as hell wasn't going to beg for it. I just had to be better. Better than anyone expected. Better than I'd ever been before. I'd show him and everyone else that I earned my spot here. So I worked harder. I stayed late. I poured my focus into every detail of the projects I was handed, no matter how small. When I noticed something off in the design, I fixed it before anyone else could see it. I didn't need them to validate my contributions. I wasn't here for praise. I was here to earn my place at the table, and little by little, I could see the shift starting to happen. The more I worked, the more my ideas started showing up in the conversations, even if my name wasn't always attached to them. But I didn't care. They'd come around. The call came on a Monday morning. Sarah Williams had pulled me into her office, a serious look on her face. Alex, we're putting you in charge of the Kingsley Urban Development Project. Kingsley was big, really big. The project was the kind of thing that could change the skyline of the city, reshape neighborhoods, and earn you the kind of recognition that lasts a career. It was a potential breakthrough, everything I'd been working for. I didn't let myself smile. I just nodded, trying to keep my composure. Thank you. I won't disappoint. Sarah's eyes softened, but only for a second. She knew what this meant, probably more than I did. I know you won't, but I also know this is going to test you. It's a complex design. I'm putting a lot of trust in you. Trust. The word hung in the air. I could feel the weight of it, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into it. Every decision felt like a mountain. I worked long nights, pored over designs, and sketched out ideas that no one had dared to suggest before. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about creating something that would endure, something that would push the boundaries of the city's landscape. I wasn't going to be just another architect. I was going to be one who left a mark. But the further I went, the more I realized how many people wanted to see me fail. In one of our team meetings, I stood at the front, outlining my vision. The mood in the room was tense, but it was my moment to shine, and I wasn't going to hold back. I finished speaking and waited for the feedback. That's when John spoke up. His voice, as smooth as ever, filled the room. "I'm not sure this is the right project for you, Alex," he said, his tone calm, casual. "You're handling a design of this complexity. Maybe someone else should take the lead. It might be better for all of us." I felt the room shift. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I swallowed hard, trying not to show my frustration. I didn't respond, not in front of everyone, but I could feel the humiliation stinging beneath my skin. John's words weren't even an attack. They were an assessment, a subtle reminder that I wasn't supposed to be here. And yet, I could feel the eyes of the team, half watching, waiting to see how I'd react. Instead of speaking, I just nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I'll make sure we're all aligned moving forward," I said. "I'll take everyone's feedback and integrate it into the design." I didn't wait for a response. I walked back to my desk, heart pounding in my chest, and shut the door behind me. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything I'd fought for. I wasn't about to let John or anyone else take this away from me. I dove into the project with more focus, more drive. I worked until my eyes burned, until I felt like I could barely keep my head above water. But every time I came up for air, the design was sharper, clearer, stronger. John's comments haunted me for a while, but I buried them deep. I knew I could do this. I would do this. Then the pushback started. The senior architects, older guys with decades of experience, started suggesting I dial back the bold ideas. "You're being too ambitious," one said. "This project isn't about breaking new ground. It's about fitting in with the old ways. Stick to the basics." They wanted me to follow the same tired methods that had been used for years, methods that I knew wouldn't stand the test of time. But I refused to back off. I had a vision, and I wasn't going to let outdated thinking kill it. Eventually, a few of the more influential partners began taking notice. Sarah had been following the progress closely, but now I was getting calls from others, calls I'd never expected to get. They were asking for updates, pushing for more details. It felt like the tide was turning. My design had caught fire, and now I was the one people wanted to hear from. By the time the project came up for review again, I had a new sense of confidence. My ideas were beginning to shape the direction, and I wasn't about to let anyone push me back into the shadows. The resistance was still there, but it didn't matter anymore. The more the senior architects fought me, the more I pushed back, knowing my design was the future. And when the partners finally saw what I'd built, a cityscape that wasn't just about efficiency, but about people, about life, I could see the recognition in their eyes. It wasn't just about the design anymore. It was about me, about what I could do when I wasn't second-guessing myself or letting others decide my worth. The phone call came in the middle of a design review. My phone buzzed quietly on the table, but I was too focused to check it. It was only when the meeting wrapped up and I saw my mother's name on the screen that I picked it up. "Alex," her voice was tight, strained. "It's your father. He's been having some health problems." The doctors think it's his heart. They've got him on meds, but it's serious. I think you should come home, honey. I felt the air get heavier. My father was the strongest person I knew. Hearing those words hit harder than I expected. I quickly excused myself from the office and booked the first flight out of town. The plane ride was long. I sat by the window, staring out at the clouds and thinking about how far I'd come. It wasn't supposed to be this way. I was supposed to be stronger, more prepared for these kinds of moments. But now I was heading back to Tennessee, not for the celebrations of success, but to face something I wasn't ready for. When I walked into the house, it was like stepping back in time. The smell of my mother's cooking, the cluttered kitchen counter, and the familiar creak of the floorboards. My father lay in bed, hooked up to machines, looking frailer than I'd ever seen him. It was a shock to my system. My mother was in the kitchen, making coffee. She glanced up when I walked in. "You look good," she said, but her eyes weren't convinced. "Busy with work, I assume?" "Yeah, you know how it is," I replied, trying to sound casual. Her silence was heavy. She finally set down the coffee pot and looked me in the eye. "You haven't made time for much else, have you?" she said, her voice soft but laced with something else. "I thought by now you'd settle down. Maybe think about starting a family. You can't work your life away, Alex. You can't be all about the projects and the deadlines." I felt the sting of her words, the quiet judgment in her tone. It was a familiar song, one I'd heard many times before, but it hit differently now. It was like she was accusing me of something I'd tried so hard to avoid, of letting my work consume me, but I didn't know how to answer. The path I'd chosen hadn't allowed for much else, and I'd made peace with that, or so I thought. I'm not I'm not like you, Mom," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "I can't live the life you want me to. I'm doing my best, okay?" Her face softened, but there was no hiding the disappointment there. She sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. "I just don't want you to wake up one day, alone, with nothing but your projects to show for it." The weight of her words stayed with me, even after I left her and went to sit by my father. I stayed there by his side for 2 days. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but things weren't clear yet. He was a fighter, but I knew that this was the kind of thing you couldn't outrun forever. And I didn't know how to reconcile that with the life I'd built. By the time I flew back to the city, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I wasn't ready to face the office, but I knew I had no choice. When I walked in, the first thing I saw were the congratulatory emails, messages from colleagues praising my design, applauding the progress of the Kingsley project. It felt hollow, though, like a moment of triumph that wasn't mine to own. I opened my inbox to find a message from John. It was brief, as expected. "Well done, Alex. Let's keep pushing forward." No congratulations, no recognition of the challenges I'd been dealing with, personally or professionally, just more work. I felt a tight knot in my chest. It stung, but I didn't let it show. Not here, not now. I had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let anything, not even my mother's disappointment or my father's condition, stand in my way. I pushed through the rest of the week, working in silence, keeping my head down. The design was good, no, better than good. It was my best work, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially John, diminish that. By the time the week was over, I was more determined than ever. I wasn't doing this for my mom, or for John, or anyone else. I was doing this for me, for the person I had become, and the person I was still working to be. The Kingsley project was mine, and I wasn't going to let anything take it from me. Not now, not ever. It was a Tuesday when it happened. Sarah Williams, always the calm in the storm, asked me to meet her in her office. I was in the middle of finalizing some details for Kingsley, so I wasn't expecting anything major. But when I walked into her office, I immediately knew something was different. The energy in the room felt heavy. "Sit down, Alex," Sarah said, her voice warm but with a hint of seriousness that immediately put me on edge. She didn't waste time. "I've been following your work on Kingsley, and I'm impressed. You've shown leadership on this project in ways that go beyond just the design." She paused, as if gauging my reaction. "I'm going to bring this up in the senior meeting today. Your work deserves the recognition." I blinked. Sarah had always been more open-minded than most, and I knew she had my back, but public recognition from a senior partner? That was something else. It was one thing for a few colleagues to send emails or drop a comment, but a meeting with the big guys? That would send a clear message to everyone in the firm. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. "I mean, I'm just doing my job." She smiled. "You're doing more than that, and you've earned it." The meeting that afternoon felt like a blur. I kept my head down, pretending to focus on the slides, my heart pounding as I prepared for whatever was coming. When Sarah stood up, I could feel the shift in the room. "We've made incredible progress with the Kingsley Urban Development Project," she began, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. "I want to take a moment to highlight Alex Carter's leadership. Not only has she shown exceptional vision in her design, but she's led this team with confidence and resolve. Her work is a testament to the future of this firm." There was a silence after she spoke, the kind of pause where everyone's eyes shifted to me, waiting for a reaction. It felt like the air had thickened, and for a moment I wondered if I had heard her correctly. Was she really saying all of this in front of everyone? My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to hold it together, nodding and offering a brief, appreciative smile. The room erupted into a scattered round of applause. Half-hearted at first, but it was enough. I could feel the eyes on me, the weight of the attention. John Myers, sitting a few rows back, didn't clap. In fact, he shifted in his seat, his face neutral, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He wasn't happy about this. It wasn't hard to figure out why. John had been around long enough to know what kind of recognition could shift the balance of power in an office. His expression said it all. This wasn't the way things were supposed to go. I looked around the room. Some of the men, the older ones who had been with the firm for decades, were clearly uncomfortable with Sarah's words, but others, young associates, mid-level guys, looked impressed. It wasn't a secret that a few had been eyeing me for leadership roles, but now it was official. Sarah had just made it clear that I wasn't just here to take up space. I was here to lead. The rush of validation hit me harder than I expected. I had spent years fighting for recognition, and now it was happening. It felt like all the long nights, all the moments of doubt and isolation had been worth it. I'd earned this. But I couldn't let myself get distracted. Not now. I couldn't afford to slow down, not when I was on the edge of something bigger than I had ever imagined. So, despite the warm glow of success, I immediately refocused on the work, ignoring the surge of pride and trying to bury the emotions. In the weeks that followed, things changed. My colleagues started treating me differently, some with more respect, others with a wary distance. The shift was subtle at first, but it was there. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their acknowledgement of what I had done. And then there was John. His passive-aggressive attitude was unmistakable. He no longer offered any real input in meetings. If I spoke, he didn't challenge me directly. Instead, he'd make pointed comments about the old ways of doing things, clearly trying to make his disapproval known. At times, I'd catch him glancing at me from across the room. His eyes narrowed, but he wouldn't say a word. It was like he was trying to erase me from his mental map of the office hierarchy. It didn't matter. His approval was irrelevant now. My reputation was changing, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all him, undermine that. One day, after a particularly tense meeting with John, I realized just how far I had come. The team was following my lead, and my designs were becoming the focal point of the project. More people came to me for answers. Sarah was still a solid ally, but now others, men, senior partners, even clients, were starting to see me the way I had always hoped, as someone who could lead with authority, who had vision, who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. It was early morning when the email hit my inbox. I was running through my calendar for the day, half-focused, when I saw the subject line, promotion announcement. I stared at the screen for a second before clicking it open. There, in plain text, was the news that I had been promoted to associate partner. The words blurred for a moment, but they didn't change. I read it again, as if expecting something different. But no, it was real. The flood of emotions came fast. Pride, relief, a little bit of disbelief. But mostly, there was an overwhelming sense of pressure. This was a huge step. My career had just taken a massive leap forward. But I knew what came with this. More responsibility, more scrutiny, more people watching, waiting for me to prove I wasn't a fluke. I had worked my ass off for this, but I'd also heard the stories. The whispers that came with promotions like this, the older guys who were just waiting for you to trip. I could already feel their eyes on me. But I wasn't going to let it shake me. I'd fought for this position, and I wasn't about to apologize for it. Sarah Williams called me into her office later that morning. She looked more serious than usual, but I knew this wasn't bad news. "Alex," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I'm happy to officially welcome you to the associate partner role. You've earned it, and you've proven yourself with your leadership on the Kingsley project. This is a big deal." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, trying to keep the gratitude from turning into something I couldn't control. "I'm ready for the next step," she smiled. "I know you are. There's one more thing. As part of your new position, I want you to take on mentorship. We've got some junior architects who need guidance, and I think you're the perfect person to help them grow. I hadn't expected that. A part of me wanted to balk at the idea. Mentoring meant more responsibility, more time spent away from the work I loved. But another part of me felt a strange excitement. I'd been the one who had fought for my place at the table, and now I had the opportunity to help others do the same. I'd be honored, I said, before I could second guess myself. I'll make sure they get the guidance they need. As Sarah spoke more about the details of my new role, I felt a strange mixture of pride and nervousness settle in my chest. I wasn't just in charge of my own work anymore. I was responsible for shaping the next generation of architects. That was a weight I hadn't anticipated, but one I was determined to carry. By the end of the day, the news had spread. The congratulations came pouring in. Emails, messages, handshakes in the hallways. It felt like a surreal dream. People were acknowledging my hard work, my perseverance. They were seeing me in a new light. It was a high I hadn't expected to feel this soon. I was finally at the top of my game, and it tasted sweet. Except for one thing, John. I'd expected his congratulations to be more genuine. Instead, his message was short and to the point. Congrats on the promotion, Alex. I'm sure you'll do fine. Let's see how it all plays out. I stared at the email, my finger hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to respond, something snarky, something that would show him I didn't need his hollow words. But I didn't. I simply deleted the message and focused on the work in front of me. The tension between John and me had been building ever since the Kingsley project. His passive-aggressive behavior had been hard to ignore, but this felt different. He wasn't even pretending to be supportive anymore. It wasn't just disappointment, it was disdain. But I couldn't let it derail me. Not now. Not when I had finally gotten to this point. If John wanted to sulk in the corner, let him. I had more important things to focus on than his petty grudges. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and congratulatory messages. I tried to keep my head down, to focus on the work, but I couldn't escape the change in the air. People were watching me more closely now. They expected me to lead, to deliver. I couldn't afford to fail. Sarah stopped by my office the next week, a rare visit. I know it's a lot, Alex, she said, her eyes kind but firm. You're going to feel the pressure, especially with the team you'll be managing now. But I believe in you. I won't let you down, I replied, meaning it more than she knew. I wasn't going to let anyone down, not Sarah. Not the juniors who would look to me for guidance, not even John. This was my moment, and I wasn't about to let it slip through my fingers. I had earned this promotion, and now I would show everyone, John included, that I belonged here. It was the first big project I was overseeing as an associate partner, a massive development in the downtown core, the kind of project that would bring in major clients and define the firm's future. I had every detail mapped out, from the design to the timeline. Every aspect was ready to be pitched to the client. But then John happened. We were in the meeting, all the senior partners around the table, and I was going over my vision for the project. I had spent days preparing, and I could see the flickers of interest in the eyes of my colleagues. This was my moment to shine. That's when John, sitting quietly at the end of the table, spoke up. I was thinking about the direction Alex is proposing, he said, tapping his pen on the table like he was about to drop some profound wisdom. It's good, but we should definitely integrate some of the more traditional elements we've used in previous projects. The glass and steel approach might be too bold for this one. Maybe if we rework this section here, he pointed to a part of my presentation, it'd give the design more balance, more weight. I froze. His finger was pointed at a part of the design I had developed, an idea I had worked for weeks to refine. It was a key aspect of the project, something fresh, something different, and he was acting like it was his idea. I felt my jaw clench. I glanced around the table. The other partners were nodding, like they didn't even notice what had just happened. But I noticed. I knew what he was doing. He was trying to co-opt my work, to take credit for it in front of everyone, and I wasn't going to let him. Actually, John, I said, cutting him off before he could continue. My voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. That concept you're talking about, it's mine. I'm the one who came up with the idea for that section. You're right in saying we need balance, but not the kind you're suggesting. My design already integrates balance with the modern elements you're talking about. The glass and steel are intentional, and they work for the vision we're pushing forward. It's new, and it's bold, but that's what the client is paying for. The room went dead silent. All eyes shifted to John. He didn't expect me to push back. I could see it in the way his face tightened, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Excuse me, Alex?" His tone was low, almost condescending. "I'm just trying to help make sure this doesn't get too risky. We don't want to overstep." "Overstep?" I repeated, barely containing the anger that was rising in my chest. "This isn't overstepping. This is the direction I'm taking this project, and I've got every reason to believe it's the right one. If you have feedback, fine. But taking credit for my ideas is not only unprofessional, it's disrespectful." John leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. He was trying to regain control of the room, trying to belittle me with his silence, but I wasn't going to let him. "I don't think it's appropriate to have this conversation in front of the team, Alex," he said, his voice now laced with a touch of irritation. "We'll discuss this later." I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. I took a step forward, locking eyes with him. "No, John. We'll discuss this now. I've earned my position, and I'm not here to have my ideas dismissed. If we're going to work together, you're going to respect the work I'm doing." The room was still. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. No one spoke, but I could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just me standing up for myself anymore. I could see the others, the younger architects, the ones who had been silently watching John's dominance for years, were taking notice. I wasn't just challenging John, I was challenging the entire old guard, and they were seeing it. Then Sarah spoke, her voice sharp and clear. "Alex is right," she said, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This project is Alex's leadership, and I support her vision. We all do." There was a brief pause, and then a few murmurs of agreement from the other partners. John's face was tight, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. The moment Sarah spoke, the balance of power had shifted. John had been put in his place, not by me, but by Sarah's unwavering backing. The meeting continued, but I couldn't focus on much of it after that. I had just stood up to John, something I'd never thought I'd have the guts to do. And it felt good. Too good. When the meeting wrapped up, John didn't even look at me. He left quickly, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a stiff tension in his posture. But I didn't care anymore. It was done. I had asserted myself, and for the first time, I realized that I didn't need his validation, or anyone else's. I was already where I needed to be. My ideas spoke for themselves, and now people were starting to see that. I had crossed a line I hadn't even known was there, and I wasn't looking back. It had been weeks since that meeting. The silence from John was deafening. He avoided me in the halls, barely acknowledging my presence during meetings. I expected as much. His passive-aggressive game was getting old, but at least it meant he wasn't trying to undermine me anymore. Then, one afternoon, as I was buried in emails, something caught my eye. It was from John. I clicked it open, expecting something professional, maybe a comment on the project we were working on. Instead, all I saw was a single thumbs-up emoji. I stared at it for a solid minute. A thumbs up. That was all. No words. No acknowledgement of my work. No congratulations. Nothing but a tiny, hollow symbol that seemed so small compared to everything I'd fought for. A wave of anger hit me, the kind I hadn't felt in a while. How dare he? After everything, after undermining me, belittling my ideas, dismissing my leadership, this was the best he could do? A fucking emoji? I gripped my mouse so hard my fingers started to ache, but before I could type out a response that I definitely regret, I stopped myself. The anger simmered, but it faded quickly. What did it matter? I didn't need his approval. I hadn't needed it for a long time. The validation I'd been craving wasn't coming from him, or anyone else, for that matter. It had to come from me. I deleted the email. No response. I didn't owe him anything. Instead, I closed the inbox, sat back in my chair, and let the quiet sense of triumph settle over me. Things had changed. I had changed. Later that week, I received an email that had nothing to do with John or anyone else at the firm. It was from an industry conference I'd been following for months. They had invited me to speak about leadership in architecture. It was a huge deal. This wasn't just some panel discussion. This was a major event where the top names in architecture were gathered. They wanted me to share my journey, my insights, and my leadership philosophy. At first, I thought it was some mistake. Me? Speak in front of that crowd? But I knew better. I had earned it. This was the kind of recognition I'd been working toward. Something that had nothing to do with John's approval or anyone else's. It was mine. My time to stand up and share what I had learned. To show who I had become. The day of the event, I stood backstage, my hands sweaty, but my mind was clear. I'd been through so much to get here. fighting for recognition, pushing back against expectations, and finally carving out a space for myself in a world that had tried to silence me. When my name was called, I walked to the podium with my head high. I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others unfamiliar, but all of them staring at me with interest. I cleared my throat, steadied my breath, and began. I'm Alex Carter, and I'm an architect. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But more than that, I'm a leader, and like all leaders, I've had to fight for my place at the table. I shared my story, the struggles, the moments of doubt, the silent battles. But I also talked about the victories, the Kingsley Project, the promotion, and the day I finally stopped waiting for others to validate my worth. I spoke about the importance of standing firm in your own vision, even when the world around you tells you that you don't belong. As I spoke, I could feel the energy in the room shifting. The quiet attention turned into something stronger, something more reverent. I wasn't just telling a story, I was sharing a truth. My truth. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, then, slowly, people started clapping. It started as a few scattered hands, but soon it built into a full standing ovation. The applause echoed in my ears, and for a second, I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't just the applause, it was the realization that I had made it. Not just in my career, but in my own life. I had fought for this moment, not for others, but for myself. And that made all the difference. As I stepped off the stage, I didn't need to look for John's approval anymore. I didn't need to check my email or wait for validation. I had proven to myself and to the world exactly who I was. The office was quiet when I finally returned, the late-night stillness wrapping around me like a blanket. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I walked past empty desks. The city lights outside the windows were dimming, the sky darkening into the deep blues of night. I settled into my chair, still buzzing from the event, but the adrenaline had started to fade. Now, it was just me and the weight of everything that had led me here. I opened my laptop, the screen lighting up in the otherwise dim room. The email from Sarah was sitting there, waiting for me. I clicked it open, my breath catching slightly as I read, Alex, congratulations! Your design has been shortlisted for the International Architecture Awards. This is a huge opportunity, and I couldn't be more proud of you. The words hit me in a way I didn't expect. My eyes stung a little, not from the emotion I thought I'd feel, but from something else, satisfaction, maybe even relief. This was it. The recognition that had felt so elusive for so long. Now in my hands, the one thing that had seemed impossible when John first dismissed me, and now, here I was, my design, one of the finalists for a prestigious competition. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the email for a moment longer, letting it settle in. I thought back to that first day when John had dismissed me in that meeting, when his condescending words had nearly crushed me. He had no idea what he was underestimating, and now the entire world, well, at least the world that mattered in architecture, was taking notice. I looked out at the city below, the lights flickering like 1,000 possibilities, each one a story, a dream, an idea. I wasn't an outsider anymore. I wasn't just fighting to be seen, to prove I belonged. I was part of the city now, part of something bigger, and I had gotten here on my own terms. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my palm to the cool glass. The skyline stretched out in front of me, buildings rising like the dreams I had built, one brick at a time. The years of hard work, the late nights, the doubts, the setbacks, everything had led me here. I wasn't just at the top of my career. I had built this place for myself, and no one could take that from me. Not John, not anyone. For the first time, I felt the quiet strength that came from knowing who I was, from staying true to what I believed in. I wasn't better than anyone else. I had simply refused to compromise, and now everything had come full circle. As I looked out at the city, I knew this was only the beginning.